I want you to imagine a 12-year-old boy. He is barely out of elementary school.
Right, just a kid.
Exactly, just a kid. And what does he want most in the world? If you ask almost any kid that age in the Netherlands right now, they will tell you they want a fat bike.
Oh, yeah, those trendy, heavy-duty electric bicycles.
Right, the ones with the really thick tires. I mean, they cost over 1,000 euros. It is the absolute ultimate teenage status symbol.
It's a huge deal for them.
Now, I want you to imagine international drug cartels approaching that specific child and offering to buy that exact bike for him.
Wow.
And all he has to do in exchange is break into a highly secured, heavily armed commercial port in the middle of the night to extract millions of euros worth of cartel cocaine.
Sounds like a movie plot.
It really does, but this isn't a dystopian novel. This is happening right now. And it brings us to our mission for you today. Welcome to the deep dive.
It is a pretty stark reality to confront, but an absolutely necessary one. We're taking a really comprehensive look into a world that exists right under the nose of everyday society.
Exactly. So our source material for this deep dive is this fascinating, heavily detailed transcript from a recent Dutch crime journalism program.
They spent a massive amount of time investigating the criminal underworld of Zeeland.
Right. And if you, our listener, aren't deeply familiar with Dutch geography, well, Zeeland is a coastal province in the southwest of the Netherlands.
Yeah, when you think of Zeeland, the image that usually comes to mind is quaint, sleepy, and beautiful.
I mean, it is famous for its massive beaches, its endless influx of summer tourists, and, its gently turning wind turbines. It's a place you go to escape the stress of the modern world.
But the journalism we are unpacking today peels back that very curated, very serene postcard layer. It reveals a massive shadow economy operating directly beneath it.
And that juxtaposition is what makes this specific region so critical to study.
Exactly. We aren't just looking at random acts of crime. We're examining how a quiet tourist destination grapples with the kind of sophisticated, hyper-violent crime you usually only associate with major global metropolises.
We are going to explore the actual physical mechanics of how global drug logistics function on the ground.
Yes, and we are going to look at 20-ton cheese heists.
Yes, you heard that correctly. Cheese heists. And we are going to dive deep into the sociological changes that occur when the shadow economy sets its sights on local youth.
But before we get into the mechanics of the crime itself, the sources make a very strong point that you cannot understand the criminal element in Zeeland without first understanding the psychology of the people who actually live there.
Right, the culture.
The environment always dictates how crime takes root. And the defining sociological feature of Zeeland, particularly in its smaller municipalities, is a cultural phenomenon the Dutch refer to as ons kent ons.
Which means basically everyone knows everyone.
Precisely. It is a dense, highly interwoven social fabric. I mean, in a massive city like London or New York, anonymity is the default state of existence.
Oh, for sure. You can live in an apartment building for 10 years and never learn the name of the person on the other side of your bedroom wall.
But in Zeeland, anonymity is a physical impossibility. Your neighbor is also the person who fixes your car, and their brother is the person who teaches your children.
And their cousin is the local baker.
Exactly. And the sources point out that this has a profound effect on law enforcement, particularly in a city like Vlissingen.
Yeah, Vlissingen has only about 46,000 residents. On a global scale, that is barely a town.
Barely a town, yet it has earned the incredibly dark nickname of Little Rotterdam.
Which makes it the most criminal city in the entire province of Zeeland. And, Rotterdam is a massive, sprawling port city with severe, large-scale urban issues.
Right, so earning the title Little Rotterdam implies a density of organized crime that is completely disproportionate to a population of 46,000 people.
It speaks to a structural infiltration.
It really does. And the reason that infiltration was able to metastasize so deeply goes right back to that on Kent-ons mentality.
The everyone knows everyone thing.
Yeah. For years, the province of Zeeland ranked dead last in the entire country for utilizing Meld Misdaad Anoniem, which is the national Dutch hotline for reporting crimes anonymously.
They were at the absolute bottom of the civic participation barrel when it came to speaking up. I want to push back on the quaintness of that culture, though, because people often romanticize small towns. They think of it as charming.
Right, the idyllic village life.
But my analogy for this is a small town high school. A small high school is essentially a surveillance state.
That's a great way to put it.
Everyone knows everyone's business, and if you do something outside the norm, the entire school knows by third period. So if you witness a serious crime in a town like Vlissingen and you call the police, there is a very real paralyzing fear.
You're afraid that somehow, through the grapevine, the criminal is going to find out it was you.
Exactly. You aren't just afraid of the cartel. You are afraid of being branded a snitch in a place where you literally cannot hide.
That is a very accurate assessment of the psychological barrier. The fear of social ostracization is primal. But when you add the threat of cartel violence to it, it becomes an impenetrable wall of silence. The people of Zeeland also suffered from a collective delusion, a sort of regional cognitive dissonance.
What do you mean?
Well, the sources noted that many residents genuinely believe that severe organized crime only happens in the big cities.
I see.
So when they saw luxury cars parked outside modest homes or young men who didn't have jobs suddenly throwing around thousands of euros, they rationalized it.
They convinced themselves it couldn't possibly be a drug syndicate because syndicates don't operate in sleepy beach towns.
Exactly. But the silence did eventually start to break.
Right. The sources mentioned that the local government had to run a massive, highly aggressive billboard campaign just to beg people to use the anonymous tip line.
And surprisingly, it worked. The campaign boosted anonymous reporting by almost 60%.
But when I read that, it really raised a question for me. A billboard. That's all it took to break decades of systemic cultural silence.
It seems too simple, right?
Yeah. How does a piece of roadside advertising overcome the deep primal fear you just described?
Well, it wasn't the billboard itself that broke the silence. It was a psychological permission the billboard granted.
Oh, interesting.
When a local government publicly acknowledges that there's a massive underworld problem, it validates the suspicions of the citizenry. The billboard essentially said, "We know what you are seeing, you are not crazy, and we need your help."
It removes the burden of being the first person to speak out.
Yes. Once the dam of denial is broken, the information starts to flow. But it is a slow process. And the irony is that while this dark, illicit network was operating in the shadows, Zeeland was simultaneously hosting one of the most wholesome, legitimate international networks you can imagine.
Oh, this was one of the most fascinating contrasts in the source material. We have to talk about the police exchange program.
It is quite a juxtaposition.
Because Zeeland is such a popular tourist destination, it gets flooded with visitors from neighboring Germany every single summer.
Massive amounts of tourists.
Yeah, the Vlissingen area alone sees something like 5 million overnight stays in a single season. The infrastructure just balloons.
So, to handle this influx, they have a 30-year-old exchange program.
Right. German police officers actually traveled to Zeeland in the summer to work alongside the Dutch police. And in return, Dutch officers travel to Germany in the winter to help patrol the massive German Christmas markets.
It is a remarkable logistical and diplomatic partnership.
But as a listener, the first thing I wondered when I read this was, how does that actually work legally?
It's a jurisdiction issue.
Yeah. If I am on a beach in the Netherlands and I commit a crime and a German police officer is the one who catches me, does that officer actually have the legal jurisdiction to arrest a Dutch citizen in the Netherlands? Or are they just walking around as highly trained uniformed translators?
That is the critical mechanical question. The answer lies in how they structure the patrols.
Okay, how do they do it?
A German officer in the Netherlands does not typically operate independently with primary arrest powers. They operate in mixed pairs. One German officer, one Dutch officer.
That makes sense.
The German officer is there to provide cultural context, linguistic fluency, and de-escalation tactics when dealing with German tourists.
So if a group of tourists is causing a disturbance.
Exactly. A German officer can speak to them in their native dialect, command respect in a familiar way, and often diffuse the situation before it turns violent.
And if an arrest absolutely must be made.
The Dutch officer, who holds the sovereign jurisdictional authority, is the one who officially executes it. It is an administrative workaround that relies on immense mutual trust.
And the sources even highlighted this wonderful anecdote about a German female officer and a Dutch female officer who were paired up in this program and ended up becoming absolute best friends.
It's a beautiful story of international cooperation.
But the contrast is just jarring because on the boardwalk, you have these police officers building wholesome, transparent, legitimate international alliances to keep the peace, right? And directly beneath their feet, in the ports and the neighborhoods, global cartels are building their own dark, highly efficient international alliances to move narcotics.
The legitimate world and the illegitimate world occupy the exact same physical space, but they operate on completely different frequencies.
Perfectly said.
And the sources make it clear that the physical space in Zeeland is about to undergo a massive transformation that will permanently alter its relationship with the criminal underworld.
Yes, the infrastructural shift. We are talking about the super prison.
A major development.
Vlissingen is currently in the process of building a new extra beveiligde, or EB for short, which is the Dutch term for a super maximum security prison.
It is slated to open around 2029 or 2030, and it's expected to create roughly 500 permanent jobs for the area.
But the backstory of how this prison ended up in Vlissingen is a bit of a bureaucratic tragedy.
It is a classic example of government compensation.
Right. So originally, the national government had promised Vlissingen that they were going to build a massive, prestigious marine barracks in the town.
You can imagine how appealing that is to a local municipality.
Oh, absolutely. Marines bring discipline, they bring a massive economic boost, they bring prestige. It's a very honorable institution to host.
But eventually, the military decided they didn't want to relocate the Marines to Vlissingen after all.
Right. So the government canceled the barracks, and as a consolation prize, they offered to build this supermax prison instead.
Quite the downgrade.
The grim local joke in Vlissingen is that they were promised the country's most disciplined soldiers, and instead, they are getting the country's most dangerous, hardened criminals.
I mean, it is an economic injection, certainly. A facility of this magnitude operates like an enclosed municipality.
Yeah, what does it take to run one of these?
It requires catering, maintenance, administrative staff, and hundreds of highly trained security personnel. It provides steady, recession-proof government employment.
That's true.
But the psychological landscape of the town changes when you anchor the absolute apex of the criminal underworld to your geography.
And we need to explain what an EB actually is, because the Dutch prison system is globally famous for being relatively progressive and rehabilitation-focused.
Very much so.
If you picture a standard Dutch prison, you might picture something resembling a highly structured community college. Inmates often wear their own clothes, they have responsibilities, they can cook their own meals in communal kitchens.
But an EB is not that.
Not at all.
The extra beveiligde inrichting is the absolute antithesis of the standard Dutch rehabilitative model. It is designed for one specific type of inmate.
Which is?
Those who present an extreme catastrophic flight risk, or those who have the resources to order assassinations and run criminal empires from behind bars.
So no communal kitchens then?
No. The architecture of an EB is built around isolation and sensory restriction. Inmates are moved constantly to prevent them from establishing routines.
Wow.
Communication with the outside world is heavily monitored, often happening behind thick walls of armored glass. Contact with other inmates is practically non-existent.
It sounds like a sterile, concrete vacuum designed to sever a high-profile criminal from their network entirely.
That is exactly what it is. And speaking of high-profile criminals, the sources brought up a very specific name to illustrate the capacity issues the state is facing.
Willem Hollander.
Yes. If you're listening outside of Europe, you might not know the name, but in the Netherlands, he is perhaps the most infamous criminal of the modern era.
He was one of the men who kidnapped the CEO of Heineken back in the 1980s, right?
Yes, and he has a sprawling, violent history in the organized crime world. He has been locked up in the country's current, fully booked EB in the town of Vogt for 11 years.
But the source material revealed a surprising update. He is actually leaving the Supermax in February 2026.
He fought his placement in the EB through the legal system and ultimately won an appeal. Yeah, he will be moved to a facility with intensive supervision, but it will no longer be the absolute isolation of the Supermax.
Which perfectly illustrates why the government is so desperate to build this new facility in Vlissingen. The current EBN vault is full.
The Dutch penal system is facing a logistical bottleneck at the highest level of security.
But while the Supermax facilities are defined by isolation, the sources take us into the standard prison system to explore something completely different. And frankly, deeply controversial.
We have to talk about the mechanics of intimacy behind bars.
This is a subject that fundamentally challenges our philosophy of what incarceration is meant to achieve.
And the sources frame this discussion around a very high-profile, very jarring situation involving a woman named Rens Kroes.
Right. To give you context, Rens Kroes is a prominent public figure in the Netherlands.
She's a successful author, a food blogger, a lifestyle influencer.
And she happens to be the sister of the international supermodel Datsun Kroes. She lives a very public, very glamorous, highly curated life. And recently, she announced to her massive audience that she is pregnant.
A standard celebrity announcement until you factor in the current status of her husband.
Exactly. Her husband, a man named Sid, is currently serving a 4.5-year prison sentence.
And he is not in prison for white-collar fraud or tax evasion.
No. In 2016, he was convicted of violently raping a woman.
The details provided in the sources are brutal.
During the assault, he choked the victim, threatened to break her neck, and threatened to kill her. He fought the charges, claiming it was consensual, but he was convicted. He exhausted his appeals, and he is now behind bars serving his time.
Yet, his wife is pregnant.
Which brings us to the bureaucratic reality of conjugal visits in the Dutch prison system.
In the Netherlands, standard prisons, again, excluding the EB Supermax facilities, allow a mechanism known as bezoek zonder toezicht.
Which translates literally to visit without supervision.
Correct. If an inmate demonstrates good behavior and meets specific administrative criteria, they are permitted one of these unsupervised visits per month with an approved partner.
I have to pause here because the cognitive dissonance of the Renscrows situation is just staggering to me.
It is difficult to reconcile.
You have a woman who built a brand on holistic wellness and a beautiful lifestyle, orchestrating scheduled intimacy with a man convicted of a violent, life-threatening sexual assault, while he is actively serving time for that assault.
It's deeply uncomfortable to process.
But beyond the celebrity aspect, I really want to understand the actual mechanics of these visits. How does a prison actually facilitate this? Because it can't possibly be a dignified process.
It is not dignified in the slightest.
Yeah.
And the sources go to great lengths to emphasize this.
Okay.
They cite a former Dutch prison director who offered a very blunt assessment of these rooms. The architectural reality is incredibly bleak.
It is not a hotel room.
No. It is a small, sterile cell containing only a bed with a plastic-lined mattress, a small sink, and a box of tissues.
Wait, really? Just a bed, a sink, and a tissue box?
That is the entirety of the infrastructure provided. Furthermore, the psychological toll is immense.
How so?
In a prison environment, there are no secrets. When an inmate and their visitor are escorted down the corridor toward that specific room by the guards, every other inmate in the cell block knows exactly where they are going and what they're doing.
Wow. It sounds incredibly degrading.
The former director noted that it is so humiliating that many long-term inmates actively choose not to request these visits.
They just opt out.
Yeah, they refuse to subject their spouses or partners to the degrading process of being searched, escorted past jeering inmates, and locked in a sterile room with a tissue box for an hour.
This brings me to a massive philosophical pushback.
Go ahead.
When I read about the bed, the sink, and the tissue box, it doesn't feel like the state is showing compassion. It feels like a grim, purely bureaucratic attempt to manage basic human biology.
That is one way to look at it.
I mean, is a prison supposed to be a place of rehabilitation that explicitly encourages maintaining family ties, even for violent offenders? Or is it meant to be a place of punishment?
It's a complex balance.
Because sanctioning intimacy for a convicted rapist in a room with a plastic mattress feels like the state has completely lost the plot regarding the moral purpose of incarceration.
You are identifying the core tension in European penal philosophy. The American model leans much more heavily toward punitive isolation.
Right.
The European model, broadly speaking, is built on the premise that an inmate will eventually re-enter society. Therefore, the state believes that intentionally severing all of an inmate's normal human societal ties will ultimately make them more damaged, more isolated, and vastly more dangerous upon their release.
Okay, I follow the logic.
The unsupervised visit is a mechanical extension of that philosophy. The state is attempting to preserve the familial bond so the inmate has an anchor when they get out.
However, as the sources reveal, while the state tries to regulate intimacy through paperwork and sterile rooms, human nature finds its own unauthorized pathways.
Yes, the source material brought in the perspective of a former inmate named Geertje, and her insights were absolutely illuminating.
She spent a significant amount of time in women's prisons, right?
She did, and she completely shattered the illusion that intimacy only happens during approved visitor hours.
Right. Geertje explained that intimate relationships between the inmates themselves are incredibly common.
Which is officially strictly prohibited.
Exactly. The administrative rule is clear. If two inmates are caught engaging in physical intimacy, they are immediately placed in solitary confinement.
So we have this bizarre bureaucratic paradox.
Yeah. The state strictly forbids organic, spontaneous intimacy between people who live together in the facility, punishing it with isolation. Yet the state administratively sanctions and schedules intimacy with outsiders.
Provided you fill out the proper request forms and utilize the designated tissue box room.
Geertje also made a fascinating point about the gender dynamics of this.
What did she say?
She said that while these relationships are highly visible and somewhat culturally accepted within women's prisons, she believes the exact same dynamic exists in men's prisons.
Just hidden away.
Yeah, it is just kept entirely underground due to differing social stigmas and the threat of violence.
It highlights the ultimate futility of trying to perfectly legislate human behavior. The prison system builds massive walls, implements rigid schedules, and writes hundreds of pages of rules to create a perfectly predictable environment.
Yet, within those walls, chaotic human nature continues to thrive.
And as the sources point out, if the state cannot fully control the environment inside a maximum security facility, it has profound difficulties controlling the chaotic, often absurd crimes happening out in the open.
Oh, absolutely. The source material takes us on a journey through crimes that range from the deeply tragic to the outright bizarre.
Let's start with the tragic.
Yes, because it anchors us firmly back in that ons kent ons, everyone knows everyone, small-town reality of Zeeland. They detailed the cold case of a man named Herman Ploegstra.
A very unsettling case.
In October of 2010, Ploegstra went to a kickboxing class in the small coastal town of Vlissingen. After the class, he left the gym, and he completely vanished.
Nobody, no struggle, just gone.
But his vehicle provided a highly suspicious clue. Later that same night, the police found his car parked in a very remote area.
And it wasn't just parked, was it?
No, it was parked sloppily, haphazardly, with the doors unlocked and the keys still sitting inside.
From an investigative standpoint, a vehicle left in that condition suggests one of two things. Either the scene was intentionally staged by a perpetrator to throw off the timeline, or the victim was violently interrupted in the middle of a mundane action.
And for 14 years, there was absolute silence. But recently, the case gained new momentum.
Yes, through the Peter Arde Vries Foundation.
Right. In the Netherlands, this foundation focuses on generating attention for cold cases, and they suddenly started receiving letters from an anonymous tipster.
And these weren't vague tips.
Not at all. The tipster was sending typed letters, providing highly specific, exact coordinates on where to dig in a local area called the Brackman Nature Reserve.
So the authorities took the letters seriously, they sent teens out to dig at the coordinates, and they found nothing.
But the interaction didn't stop there.
The tipster wrote back.
Yes. The tipster actually wrote back again and essentially said, "You are looking in the correct spot, but you need to dig deeper."
Wow. The psychology of a tipster in a 14-year-old cold case is fascinating, especially in a tight-knit region like Zeeland.
Yeah, why wait so long?
Well, in a community where everyone knows everyone, secrets are incredibly difficult to keep, yet the fear of reprisal allows them to endure for decades.
So who is writing these letters?
The person writing these letters falls into one of two categories. They could be the perpetrator, engaging in a cruel psychological game with law enforcement to exert power and control.
That's horrifying. And the other option?
Or, and perhaps more likely, it is an accessory or a witness. It is someone whose conscience has been slowly buckling under the weight of this massive secret for 14 years, but who is still too terrified of the local criminal element to come forward publicly.
They want the body to be found, but they refuse to risk their own life to make it happen.
Exactly.
And meanwhile, the Ploegstra family is just trapped in a 14-year state of suspended animation. They aren't even looking for justice at this point. They just want a body to bury.
It is a heartbreaking example of how the culture of silence physically damages a community.
But from this incredibly heavy topic, the sources pivot to stories that are so absurd they sound like they were written by a Hollywood screenwriter.
Just to establish how weird the criminal mindset can get.
Yeah, they share a brief anecdote about a fugitive in New Zealand.
A thematic parallel to illustrate the bizarre spectrum of criminal behavior.
Exactly. So this fugitive had been on the run, and he finally got tired of constantly looking over his shoulder. He decided he was going to turn himself in to the authorities.
But he didn't just walk into a police station.
No. Instead of just walking into the local police precinct and sitting down at the front desk, this guy rents a private helicopter.
Naturally.
He flies the helicopter to the police station, and while he is in the air, he is eating fresh oysters and drinking expensive champagne.
A grand, deeply narcissistic, theatrical gesture. He wanted to dictate the terms of his own surrender, essentially saying, "You didn't catch me? I am allowing you to arrest me, and I am going out in luxury.
And the mention of oysters in that anecdote brings the source material roaring right back to Zeeland.
Yeah.
Because apparently the coastline of Zeeland is the epicenter of a massive, highly organized oyster poaching syndicate.
To understand the crime, you have to understand the legal baseline. In Zeeland, the local laws allow a private individual to forage up to 10 kilograms of oysters per day for their own personal use.
The philosophy is to allow citizens to enjoy the natural resources in a sustainable, non-commercial manner. Which, by the way, 10 kilograms is a massive amount of oysters for one person to eat. You would be eating oysters for a week.
It is a very generous allowance. However, organized poaching syndicates are not out there gathering 10 kilos for a family dinner.
They are operating on an industrial scale.
They are harvesting hundreds, sometimes thousands of kilograms of oysters to sell directly into the black market and to complicit restaurants.
The source material highlights a specific trial from 2022 involving 5 individuals. One of the groups involved was apprehended with a staggering 2,250 kilograms of poached oysters.
It's hard to even picture that.
I really need you, the listener, to pause and visualize the logistics of that. Stealing 2,250 kilos of oysters isn't a guy wandering down the beach with a plastic bucket and a clam rake.
No, absolutely not.
We're talking about 2.25 metric tons of living seafood. You need trucks, you need heavy-duty containers, you need a coordinated team. That is an entire rogue seafood supply chain operating in the dead of night.
It is like something out of a culinary mafia movie.
It really is. And their tactics on the ground are incredibly cynical.
The authorities detailed one specific family, right?
Yes, this family would go out foraging on the mudflats and intentionally bring their 3 very young children, essentially toddlers, with them.
Why bring toddlers to a heist?
Well, if a wildlife warden or the police confronted them, the parents would point to their 50-kilogram haul and claim it was perfectly legal.
Because of the 10-kilogram allowance per person.
Exactly. They would argue that each of the 5 family members, including the toddlers who couldn't even lift an oyster, was simply claiming their individual 10-kilogram legal allowance.
They were essentially exploiting their own children as legal loopholes to run a commercial black market seafood operation.
It is brilliant in the most devious, unethical way possible. But here's the mechanism I really want to explore: the economics of the punishment.
This is key.
The sources note that the standard fines for this level of commercial oyster poaching range between 1,500 and 2,000 euros.
Let's do the math on that.
Yeah, if you are fencing over 2 tons of fresh oysters to restaurants on the black market, you are easily making 10 to 20,000 euros, if not more.
Easily.
If your worst case scenario for getting caught is a 2,000 euro fine, that isn't a legal deterrent, that is just a minor operating expense. It is a 10% tax on an incredibly lucrative business.
You have precisely identified the core economic vulnerability of the justice system. Organized crime is fundamentally agnostic about what it steals.
It only cares about the ratio of risk to reward.
Exactly. It will always follow the path of least resistance and highest profit. If the legal consequences are minimal, like a fine and no jail time, and the market demand is high, criminal syndicates will exploit it mercilessly.
And this economic reality isn't just limited to seafood.
No, the sources highlight a rapidly growing trend of massive agricultural and food-based heists across Europe.
Okay, the cheese heists. When I read this section, I actually laughed out loud, but the numbers involved are totally serious.
They are massive operations.
The sources detail a specific transport theft that occurred somewhere between Germany and France. An organized gang managed to steal 20 tons, that is 20,000 kilograms of Emmental cheese.
Unbelievable.
The street value of that single shipment was estimated to be around 80,000 euros. And it's happening closer to home, too.
In the Dutch province of Brabant.
Yeah, there are specialized agricultural gangs that target local dairy farms. They are stealing 1,000 kilo hauls of massive artisanal cheese wheels right out of the aging sheds.
And these wheels are worth between 100 and 400 euros apiece.
It sounds absurd on the surface. Stealing cheese sounds like a cartoon plot. But the logistics required to execute a 20-ton heist require serious military-level organization.
They really do.
This is exactly what I want to understand. How do you actually pull this off? Because as a listener, I am trying to imagine the physical reality of stealing 20,000 kilos of Emmental.
It's not something you can hide easily.
Exactly. Where is the safe house for that? You can't just hide it in your garage. It will rot. Do you need to steal a refrigerated warehouse too?
You do.
And who is the fence for stolen Emmental? Is there a guy standing in a dark alley behind a supermarket opening his trench coat and it's just lined with wedges of cheese? How does a cartel actually turn 20 tons of cheese into 80,000 euros in cash?
So the mechanism of the gray market is fascinating, and it is far more corporate than a guy in an alley.
Okay, break it down for me.
When you steal 20 tons of a perishable commodity, you already have a buyer lined up before you even hijack the truck. You are working with a corrupt, or at least willfully blind, wholesale distributor.
Ah, so the fix is in from the start.
Right. The criminals forge a new bill of lading the shipping manifests. They take the stolen Emmental and they deliver it to the complicit wholesaler.
And then what?
That wholesaler then mixes the stolen, heavily discounted cheese in with their legitimate inventory. From there, it is shipped out to discount supermarkets, pizza chains, and restaurant suppliers across Europe.
So the end consumer never has any idea they're eating stolen goods.
Exactly. Once food enters the secondary market and is repackaged or processed, it is entirely untraceable. You cannot run a serial number on a slice of cheese.
That is wild.
And while it invites humor, the underlying logistical mechanism is identical to narcotics trafficking. You are securing supply, managing transport, and utilizing a network of distributors.
The syndicates are simply diversifying their portfolios.
Yes. Stealing a truck full of cheese, or, as the sources also mention, shipments of Kit Kat bars, carries significantly less physical risk of armed confrontation.
And vastly lower legal penalties than moving a shipping container full of cocaine.
Exactly. But it still yields a massive, untraceable return on investment.
It shows how incredibly adaptable the underworld is. But as lucrative as stolen cheese and poached oysters might be, they're ultimately just side hustles.
The real money, the billions of euros, and the real existential danger to society flows through the massive industrial machinery of Zeeland's shipping infrastructure.
And this is where the scale of our deep dive shifts from local oddities to international security threats.
The port of Vlissingen is a major node in the global supply chain.
But to understand why it is so heavily targeted by cartels, you have to understand how its physical architecture differs from its massive neighbor, the port of Rotterdam.
This is a crucial distinction.
Yeah. When most people picture a global port, they picture Rotterdam. You see endless towering walls of identical steel shipping containers.
Right. Highly automated.
Exactly. Rotterdam is heavily automated. Giant robotic cranes move those containers around like Lego bricks. It is highly standardized. But Vlissingen operates on a completely different model.
It is primarily what the logistics industry calls a break bulk port.
Meaning the cargo does not arrive neatly sealed in identical steel boxes?
Right. Break bulk cargo arrives loose, or on wooden pallets. We are talking about massive cargo ships filled with thousands of loose pallets of bananas or giant open mountains of coal, sand, and scrap metal sitting in the hold of the ship.
This logistical difference is the key to understanding the vulnerability.
Yes, unloading a standardized container ship in Rotterdam is incredibly fast and requires very few humans on the ground.
But unloading a break bulk ship in Vlissingen,
It is inherently slow, chaotic, and incredibly labor-intensive. The sources note that a single ship arriving in Vlissingen carrying 8,000 pallets of fruit can take a day and a half to fully unload, requiring 3 separate massive cranes and dozens of dock workers operating in the hold.
my analogy for this is comparing an Amazon fulfillment center to a massive, chaotic farmer's market.
That's a good way to look at it.
Rotterdam is the Amazon warehouse. Everything is boxed, barcoded, tracked by lasers, and moving on automated conveyor belts at light speed. Vlissingen is the farmer's market. Everything is loose, it's out in the open. It requires intense, sweaty, human manual labor to move every single piece of inventory.
And because of that chaos, there are a million dark corners, shadows, and blind spots.
If you are a cartel looking to hide something, the chaotic farmer's market is the perfect environment.
A very apt operational comparison.
Yeah.
And the cartels exploit this chaos brilliantly. The primary cover for cocaine smuggling in Vlissingen is the South American fruit trade, specifically bananas.
The white bananas. This was one of the wildest details in the transcript. The local customs agents actually have a grim saying.
What is it?
Bananas always arrive green. If they arrive yellow, there was a logistical delay. But if you see white bananas, it means you found the cocaine.
Right.
The cartels are physically dismantling pallets of bananas in South America, hiding massive, heavy blocks of cocaine deep inside the center of the pallet, and rebuilding the fruit around it.
And this presents an almost impossible mathematical and logistical nightmare for customs enforcement.
Because they can't check everything, right? If Customs agents decided to physically unwrap and inspect every single pallet of bananas coming off a ship that takes a day and a half to unload. The entire legitimate supply chain would instantly grind to a halt.
Precisely. If law enforcement demands perfect security, the fruit rots on the docks, the shipping companies go bankrupt, and the supermarket shelves in Europe sit empty.
You would paralyze the national economy in your attempt to protect it.
So, Customs is forced to rely on risk analysis. They use algorithms to flag suspicious routes, they use sniffer dogs, and they rely on random sampling.
They know, as a mathematical certainty, that they are only catching a fraction of the narcotics moving through the port.
Exactly. But the cartels aren't just relying on hiding drugs inside the cargo itself, they're also exploiting the physical engineering of the ships.
This brings us to the divers. When I read this part of the source material, it felt entirely surreal. It reads like an action movie script, but it is happening every day.
The use of specialized smuggler divers is a testament to the cartel's logistical ingenuity.
The mechanics of it are insane.
Yeah.
When a massive cargo ship is docked in a port in South America, the cartel will send scuba divers into the water.
Under the ship.
Yeah, these divers will swim under the massive hull of the ship and stuff packages containing 100 to 200 kilograms of pure cocaine deep inside the sea chests.
Which are the massive underwater grates that intake cooling water for the ship's engines.
Right. The ship then sails all the way across the Atlantic Ocean with the drugs hidden below the waterline. When the ship finally arrives in Zeeland, before it even fully docks to be inspected, local smuggler divers swim out into the channel to extract the drugs.
And because Vlissingen is a unique coastal town where the massive commercial port infrastructure blends seamlessly into the public recreational areas, this creates a bizarre visual.
It really does.
These local smuggler divers are literally walking off the public tourist beaches, strapping on scuba gear, disappearing under the water, swimming into an active commercial shipping lane, executing a high-stakes, incredibly dangerous underwater drug extraction beneath a moving vessel, and then swimming right back to the tourist beach.
It is so brazen. And if the cartels don't want to deal with the extreme physical risk of underwater diving, they use what the sources call the drop-off method.
Oh, yeah.
The cartels will wrap massive bundles of cocaine in heavy-duty waterproof packaging, attach highly sophisticated waterproof GPS trackers to them, and as the cargo ship approaches the Westerschelde, the main waterway leading into the port, the crew will simply throw the packages overboard.
Just toss them in the water.
Yeah. Then local criminals in small, insanely fast speedboats zip out from the shoreline, track the GPS signal on a tablet, yank the floating drugs out of the water, and speed away before the Coast Guard even registers they are there.
Though, as the sources are quick to point out, the ocean is unpredictable, and this method is prone to spectacular, highly public failures.
Spectacular failures is an understatement. The sources detailed an incident from about 6 years ago. A drop-off in the waterway went completely wrong.
The speedboats missed the package.
Yeah, the tide shifted, and 300 kilograms of pure cartel cocaine just washed up directly onto Calute Beach, which is a very popular local spot for walking and foraging.
And the public reaction to this event perfectly illustrates the corrosive allure of the shadow economy.
It was absolute madness. Once the rumor spread that 300 kilos of cocaine were sitting on a public beach, the sources said that ordinary citizens from major cities hours away, people from Amsterdam, people from The Hague, got in their cars in the middle of the night and drove all the way down to Zeeland.
Just unbelievable.
Hundreds of people were wandering the beach in the pitch black with flashlights, pretending they were just walking their dogs, desperately hoping to stumble upon a multi-million-euro package of cartel drugs.
It demonstrates how quickly ordinary law-abiding citizens will abandon their morality when presented with the prospect of instant, life-changing wealth.
But what those citizens failed to realize is the immense lethal danger of finding one of those packages.
The cartel isn't just going to let you keep it.
Yeah.
Exactly. These packages are not anonymous bricks of powder. They are highly tracked inventory. They are stamped with specific cartel logos, batch numbers, and as we discussed, GPS trackers.
The cartel knows exactly what is missing and roughly where it was lost.
If a civilian finds a package, puts it in the trunk of their car, and takes it home to try and sell it, they're placing themselves and their entire extended family directly into the crosshairs of a ruthless transnational criminal organization. The cartel will hunt for that package, and they do not care who they have to hurt to get it back.
The danger is immense, but as terrifying as it is to have civilians hunting for drugs on a beach, we have to address the most systemic, existential threat to the port's integrity.
The corporate side of things.
Right. It is one thing for criminals to sneak around outside a ship in scuba gear or to speed around in boats. It is entirely another level of threat when the criminals are the ones sitting in the boardroom running the actual port facilities.
Yes. We must discuss the Terminal Zeeland case. This is where the narrative shifts from traditional cops and robbers to outright corporate treason.
This case blew my mind. Burke Terminal was a massive, highly respected local employer in Vlissingen. It was a massive facility dealing in bulk goods mountains of soy, coal, and scrap metal.
It was a pillar of the local economy.
But recently, the mayor of Vlissingen was forced to take the extreme step of shutting the entire operation down, and the directors of the company, the actual corporate executives, are currently on trial.
They are accused by the state of utilizing their massive bulk terminal as a direct, purpose-built front for international drug smuggling on an industrial scale.
The sheer scope of the corruption is staggering. Law enforcement intercepted 6 separate drug transports directly linked to this specific terminal.
And we aren't talking about small-time smuggling.
No. The shipments ranged from 100 kilos to a massive 2,188 kilogram shipment of cocaine. They were hiding the drugs deep inside shipping containers filled with jagged bulk scrap metal.
Knowing that customs agents would have an incredibly difficult time physically searching through tons of sharp steel.
And the allegations suggest that the terminal's management wasn't just being extorted or turning a blind eye, they were actively, willingly facilitating the logistics.
The sources state they were linked to the most wanted criminal in the entire Netherlands, a cartel boss known as Bolojo.
The executives of this terminal were allegedly so deeply involved that they ran test shipments.
Test shipments.
Yeah, they would arrange for containers of scrap metal to be shipped from West Africa to their terminal in Zeeland containing absolutely no drugs.
Just empty, essentially.
They did this purely to A/B test the national security apparatus. They wanted to see if customs algorithms would flag the specific route, if the containers would be X-rayed, or if sniffer dogs would be deployed.
They were stress testing the government's defenses on behalf of a cartel. This represents the absolute ultimate form of what Dutch law enforcement and sociologists refer to as undermining.
I want to make sure we define that clearly because it is a crucial concept.
Undermining occurs when the legal, legitimate upper world is completely hollowed out, corrupted, and weaponized by the criminal underworld.
Okay, I follow.
When the people providing the complex logistics, the corporate administration, and the physical legal space for drug smuggling are the actual CEOs of a major legally registered corporation, the line between the upper world and the underworld vanishes entirely. The cancer has reached the brain of the organism.
And it paralyzes law enforcement because if the actual board of directors of a major port terminal are running the cartel's logistics, how can the police or customs ever trust the infrastructure they're supposed to protect?
They can't.
The enemy isn't just trying to breach the gates. The enemy built the gates. The enemy owns the security cameras, and the enemy signs the paychecks of the guards.
It creates a state of total institutional paranoia. And it is important to understand why Vlissingen is suddenly seeing this massive surge in corporate undermining.
Why is that?
It is a direct result of the waterbed effect in law enforcement strategy.
Explain the waterbed effect.
For the past decade, the Dutch national government recognized that the massive port of Rotterdam was the primary entry point for European cocaine. In response, they poured massive amounts of funding, advanced technology, and specialized security resources into fortifying Rotterdam.
They made it incredibly difficult to smuggle drugs through that specific port.
So if you push down hard on one side of a waterbed, the water doesn't disappear. It just bulges up on the other side of the bed.
Right.
Precisely. The cartels did not stop smuggling cocaine into Europe. They simply ran a cost-benefit analysis and calculated that Rotterdam had become too costly, too slow, and too risky. So they simply squeezed their massive logistical operations southward, relocating to the less fortified break-bulk ports of Vlissingen and Antwerp.
The crime didn't evaporate, it just relocated to the new path of least resistance.
But the tragedy of this corporate undermining is that the corruption doesn't just stay contained in the boardrooms or on the docks. It trickles all the way down, saturating the local community, right down to the children living in the neighborhoods just outside the port gates.
And this brings us to the darkest, most gut-wrenching part of the source material. We have spent a lot of time talking about the logistics of the drugs. But we have to talk about the human cost.
It is a devastating reality.
Because the influx of cartel money and narcotics has earned Vlissingen another, much darker nickname, Flakka City.
For listeners who might not be familiar with the pharmacology of the street, flakka is an incredibly potent, incredibly cheap synthetic stimulant.
It is often referred to colloquially in the media as a zombie drug.
Because of the severe, erratic, highly aggressive, and sometimes entirely catatonic behavioral states it induces in its users.
And the sources noted that this addiction crisis isn't hidden away. It is highly visible on the streets of Vlissingen, and the crisis is rapidly spilling over into neighboring historical towns like Middelburg.
But the visibility of the drug trade creates a horrifying psychological environment for the local youth.
Yeah, when kids grow up seeing the drug economy operating openly, they don't see it as a cautionary tale. They see it as the only viable career path that offers real money. And the cartels are fully, systematically exploiting this.
The recruitment tactics on the ground have shifted dramatically in recent years. To successfully smuggle drugs out of a port, the cartels need expendable labor on the inside to physically break into the containers and pull the drugs out before customs finds them.
These individuals are known in the Dutch underworld as withalers.
Which translates to extractors.
Historically, who did these jobs?
Historically, this was a highly dangerous job reserved for older teenagers, usually 18 or 19 years old, or young men in their early 20s.
But the sources reveal a horrifying shift. The cartels are now actively targeting and recruiting 12 and 13-year-old boys for this job.
12 years old.
Kids who are barely out of elementary school. Kids whose brains haven't even begun to fully develop an understanding of long-term consequences. And you want to know what the cartels are paying these children to risk their lives, risk getting shot by police, and risk going to prison.
We mentioned it at the beginning.
They are paying them with a fat bike.
The economic asymmetry is staggering. An older teenager, an 18-year-old who understands the legal risks, would demand thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of euros in untraceable cash to execute a dangerous port extraction.
But the cartels are masterful psychological manipulators.
They realize that a 12-year-old's absolute loyalty and their physical labor can be purchased entirely with a trendy electric bicycle.
I have to drop my usual witty analogies here because I am just genuinely deeply horrified by this. We are talking about the systematic exploitation and weaponization of children by multi-billion-dollar syndicates.
It represents a devastating societal shift. The former inmate we discussed earlier, Gerci, explicitly noted this evolution in the sources.
What did she say about it?
In the past, the criminal underworld operated on a very strict, albeit hypocritical, moral code. The unwritten rule was always, you don't touch women and you never involve children.
And now?
That code is completely dead. The modern, globalized cartels view these 12-year-olds as entirely disposable biological assets. They do not care if the child gets arrested and ruined by the justice system.
They do not care if the child gets traumatized.
They certainly do not care if the child gets killed in a crossfire. Because if one 12-year-old is lost, they simply drive into the neighborhood and promise a fat bike to the next one. The supply of vulnerable youth is endless.
And the gamification of this crime is absolutely terrifying. The sources interviewed the director of customs at the port, and he gave a chilling account of how the behavior of these young extractors has changed when they are caught.
Yes, he explained that just a few years ago, if customs agents or the port police cornered a young extractor hiding by a broken fence, the kid would immediately surrender.
They would drop their tools, lie face down on the concrete, and give up.
Because they understood the transactional rules of the game. You took a risk, you got caught, you surrendered to minimize the damage.
But not anymore. The director stated that customs agents are now regularly facing violent, aggressive physical resistance from 15, 16, and 18-year-olds.
It has escalated to the point where heavily armed port police and military police have been forced to draw their weapons and fire warning shots into the air just to apprehend teenagers.
Think about that. These kids are actively fighting back against heavily armed tactical officers. Why? Because going to jail has actually become a twisted status symbol for them. It elevates their street credibility.
And this is where traditional law enforcement paradigms completely collapse. The entire justice system is built on the concept of deterrence.
Right.
But you cannot deter someone by threatening them with a punishment they actively desire. If a teenager views a prison sentence not as a failure, but as a graduation ceremony that earns them respect in their neighborhood, the threat of arrest loses all of its power.
So how does the state even begin to fight back against a culture where kids want to go to jail?
They are attempting a two-pronged approach: physical hardening and psychological intervention. On the physical side, the port authorities are installing what they call smart fences.
What makes them smart?
These are physical barriers heavily integrated with advanced thermal sensors, motion detectors, and AI-driven camera systems designed to detect and intercept intruders before they can access the containers.
Okay, and on the psychological side, they're trying to tackle the demand. The sources highlighted a fascinating educational program running at the local maritime museum.
Yes, they designed a serious game, which is an interactive, immersive educational simulation. The program is called Koken aan de Kust, which is a clever Dutch pun that translates roughly to cooking at the coast, but also coke at the coast.
And who are they targeting with this simulation?
They're specifically running thousands of local trade school students through it. In the Dutch educational system, these are the MBO students.
MBO is the vocational training track, typically for students aged 16 to 18 who are learning trades like logistics, mechanics, and construction.
The cartels heavily target these specific students because they are the ones who will eventually work in the port, drive the trucks, and operate the cranes.
The museum simulation is designed to rip away the glamour of the cartel lifestyle. It shows them the grim, violent, highly stressful, and often fatal reality of the drug trade.
They're trying to shatter the illusion before the cartels can recruit them with a fat bike or a handful of cash.
It is a vital educational initiative, and that kind of blunt education is crucial not just for the vulnerable youth, but for the general public as well.
Absolutely. We discussed the incident earlier where ordinary citizens were wandering the beach looking for washed-up cocaine. Yeah. The sources stress how vital it is for the public to understand the true nature of the organizations they are dealing with. If a cartel is ruthless enough to send a 12-year-old into an armed port, they will not hesitate for a microsecond to inflict catastrophic violence on a civilian family that accidentally takes one of their packages.
The danger is everywhere, and it is constantly rapidly shifting, which brings me to a massive, slightly cynical pushback on our whole defensive system.
What's the pushback?
We are talking about building million-euro smart fences, and we are putting up advanced thermal cameras and running museum simulations. But the sources point out that the cartels are already evolving past all of this.
They are always a step ahead.
They mention that syndicates are already moving massive logistical operations to southern European ports to avoid the heat in Zeeland, and they are deploying incredibly advanced evasion tactics like chemical camouflage.
Chemical camouflage is perhaps the most sophisticated evasion tactic currently in use, and it entirely bypasses traditional physical security.
Explain how it works, because it sounds like science fiction.
Well, instead of trying to hide physical, solid blocks of white powder in a pallet of bananas, cartel chemists utilize advanced processes to dissolve the cocaine entirely into a liquid state.
Okay.
They then take massive shipments of ordinary, legitimate textiles, things like denim jeans, cotton shirts, or towels, and they literally soak the clothing in the liquid cocaine. They let the textiles dry.
Wow.
Once dry, the clothes look, feel, and smell like perfectly normal garments. They can be packed in suitcases or shipped in standard commercial containers. They will completely bypass standard visual inspections and often confuse sniffer dogs.
And then what happens when the clothes reach Europe?
Once the shipment reaches a cartel safe house or an illegal laboratory in Europe, they use a secondary chemical washing process to extract the cocaine back out of the fabric, returning it to a powder form for street distribution.
Which brings me back to my pushback. If the cartels have the unlimited resources to employ teams of chemists to invent chemical camouflage, and they have the sociological leverage to recruit children who actively want to go to prison for the clout,
I see where you're going.
isn't technology just a Band-Aid on a massive arterial societal hemorrhage? Are we just obsessively treating the symptoms by building better fences and deploying more guards while the patient quietly bleeds out on the table?
I agree completely with your assessment, and that fundamentally is exactly why deep dives into primary source material like this transcript are so incredibly vital.
Exactly.
If society only looks at the metrics of law enforcement, if we only celebrate the tonnage of drugs seized, or the number of thermal cameras installed, or the number of arrests made, we miss the forest for the trees.
This is not just a story about narcotics or port logistics or agricultural theft.
No, this is a story about the very fabric of communities like Zeeland being tested to their absolute limits. When 12-year-olds are viewed and treated as disposable, single-use cartel assets, the crisis has permanently moved beyond the realm of law enforcement. It represents a fundamental, catastrophic societal failure.
It is a very heavy, complex reality to process. And it brings us perfectly back to the paradox where we started this entire deep dive, because the duality of Zealand is just incredible to hold in your mind.
It is striking.
On the surface, you have this beautiful place of quaint tourist beaches. You have German and Dutch police officers becoming best friends while eating ice cream and patrolling summer festivals in the sunlight.
And existing directly underneath that, occupying the exact same physical space, is a multi-billion-dollar shadow economy.
An economy featuring underwater cartel divers swimming beneath cargo ships, organized syndicates executing 20-ton mental cheese heists, and 12-year-old kids trading their futures and potentially their lives for a fat bike.
It is a duality that leaves us with a profound and perhaps deeply disturbing final thought to consider.
What's that?
If we synthesize everything we've discussed today, the logistics of the port, the speed of the agricultural gray market, the borderless nature of the cartels, it highlights the ultimate unavoidable vulnerability of modern globalism.
Unpack that for us. What is the ultimate vulnerability?
For the past several decades, human society has optimized the entire world for friction-free, hyper-efficient commerce.
Right. Globalization.
We have built legitimate global supply chains that are absolute marvels of engineering. We designed them to be faster, cheaper, and more perfectly integrated than anything in human history. We built a system so perfect that a green banana harvested in Ecuador can arrive at your local supermarket in Europe at the exact moment it turns perfectly yellow.
Okay, but what's the catch?
But in doing so, in removing all the friction from global trade, we have inadvertently built the perfect, frictionless delivery system for the global underworld.
Wow.
The exact same logistical efficiency that brings you your morning coffee, your winter strawberries, and your affordable electronics is what makes the shadow economy virtually unstoppable. The cartels do not need to spend billions inventing their own logistics networks. They simply parasitize ours.
That is a staggering way to look at it.
And this raises an existential question for the modern, interconnected world. Will there ever be a way to have a perfectly open, highly efficient global economy that is also perfectly secure? Or is the shadow economy, the corruption in the ports, and the violence in the streets simply the permanent, unavoidable tax we must pay for the privilege of living in a hyper-connected world?
That is a chilling thought to end on. We spent decades building the ultimate machine. We really can't be surprised when someone else figures out how to drive it for their own purposes. I want to thank you for joining us on this intense, incredibly detailed journey today.
It's been a critical conversation.
The next time you are standing on a picturesque beach looking at a massive cargo ship slowly moving across the horizon, or the next time you pick up a slightly too yellow banana at the grocery store, I encourage you to look twice. Remember that the postcard you see on the surface is almost never the whole story. Sometimes you have to force yourself to look at the X-ray to see the machinery that is really running the world.